Well, I was going to, I didn't know if someone else was sitting here.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So I'm going to introduce the item real quick for those in the room. What we'll encourage is council discussion following a brief introduction. We do have the chief, the captain, Mr. Banks was nice enough to join us. For those that don't know, does some background IT. We thought having expertise in a variety of areas for the discussion will make it well-rounded and have everybody informed to the best that we can here tonight. I would note there are some circumstances in these where things can get nuanced or we explore hypotheticals. There might be a time or two where an answer to a question might be, I don't know. But based on about a week ago, Councilmember Greenberg requested a council meeting discussion here. Some high level, since I've got a couple of things by way of, this would be helpful to know as we go into this conversation. We'll reiterate everything that's laid out in the memo here. We try to put in front of you sort of a framework around how this works, try to demystify some of the things that have been floating out there about what operations look like and how things go. One of the things I'll call out that maybe isn't in here specific, specific to city operations and not just this single tech. The cybersecurity piece, the access piece, there's been a lot of questions about how things work, how things don't. I've talked to a couple of you, so don't shut out the answer, but use this as an example. I was just chatting with IT last week about in the month of July, we've got 90 full-time employees here. If you can imagine, based on that number of emails, how many malicious malware, Trojan horse type of emails do you think got sent to the city? You don't have to shout it out. Maybe just think in your mind, thinking, 130,000. So I just use that to frame up any type of technology, any piece of equipment that kind of falls into this world. We take that type of thing very seriously. It's not the glamorous thing that we talk about real often in kind of the behind the scenes work, but again, that's a piece that we take very seriously. So again, we've got operational, policy-wise, and kind of tech here to answer some of those questions. There were some calls by way of Robbinsdale operation specific. Again, those are noted in your memo here, but again, we encourage some council conversation and staff is here to respond to questions, comments, or concerns. So Mayor Pro Tem, I'll throw it back to you.
Thank you for that, and opening it up. I was asking that too. I think I appreciate council giving all the things to the work session as well too. And I know this is a conversation to begin, I think, and hopefully a conversation that can go through for us to really talk about this as experience for communities outside of Robbinsdale as well too. So I think it's important for those going on Robbinsdale and us impacting us, and try to keep it local, close, and immediate there. So it's something to keep in mind for this conversation as well too. So with that being said, anyone to share that?
I can maybe kick off since I brought it up. And so this all kind of went back to, there was an article in the Star Tribune about flock data and the automatic license plate reader type technology that Robbinsdale's data was accessed. And so it sort of led me to some questions, and I've heard here and there some feedback from residents of, it's like that they're worried about what's being captured, or is it, do we really need it? And so I've asked some questions previously, but it felt like this was a good time to bring it up again, especially as other municipalities are starting to remove flock cameras. I think it's less, for me at this point, it's less about getting rid of it, and it's more understanding how we use it, the policy around it. And so I guess one example that I would give is that I'm under the impression that after that incident, other cities don't have access to our data anymore, that wouldn't happen again. And I guess from my perspective, is that because of a policy, or is that because of a setting? Did we just change a setting, and so now that change it, or was that something that's in policy that we should discuss? Because I think who has access and how, I guess at a very high level, one of the things that I've been thinking about is that it's okay, well, only, there are rules around when data can be accessed, and it has to be criminal activity, but then there's definitions of criminal activity, and from, I think that we all have an understanding of what happens in Robbinsdale, but you know, how the federal government interprets like a crime that would be, you know, allow them to have access might not be the same as our definition. So I just wanna make sure we have a conversation from a policy standpoint about like how we're using this. There is, you know, in anything we do with technology, there's risk. We just heard about how many attempts to get access to our systems, and it's a lot. But balancing the benefits with the risks of using this technology, I guess that's kind of like where I would want to start and just have a conversation. And I don't know if that leads us off to like, I know some of it was in the memo, but I guess I just want to like confirm that like other agencies like don't have access to our data. I know there's sort of like a nationwide network that can be, that we can be connected to. Like, do they have access to our data or not? Like, do we take part in that or do we not? And then I guess, you know, again, the idea of like, the changes that were made, just confirming, yes, like, that they don't have access, but like, is that a setting we made in the system, or is that like a larger policy decision that we made? So that's like a lot, and I don't expect every answer, but that's like kind of where my head was at as far as this conversation.
Thank you for that. And I think, just to go off your first question, though, honestly, around like, the implications behind access and how that's done, and are we able to, like, how does that work? Is it a switch, or is somebody like, yeah, how does that work as far as the access to our system? Thank you. And there's a couple other questions we'll get into, yeah. We'll get that first.
Yeah, and I think what would help me really kind of envision this through, because we have the automatic license plate readers. When I went on the ride along, it actually picked up on a vehicle reported stolen, but from another state. So it was like a false alarm kind of thing. And then it sounds like Flock is like the AI thing that kind of connects like the database. And again, I don't know too much about this exactly besides what we've been, you know, reading on recently with what other cities have been doing and how they've been suspending their automatic license plate readers or Flock, or changing certain toggles on the Flock system in general. But I kind of want to just know, like, baseline picks up on, so let's say like the automatic license plate reader picks up on a car, that data gets shared, then what happens with that data? And then who can kind of request access to that data, or can they just have access to it on the database, or do they have to go through like our city to like kind of get that information? So I think that that's just kind of a good starting point on where I'm at and how I envision like these answers.
A lot of questions. I'll try to hammer out a couple of them.
Well, that we just, I wonder, because I think you had a great point. That first question is, what is Flock? I think it's to revisit what is Flock. Because I think that's, as a mystery, so, well, I think we've talked about before, but it's for everybody to have access.
You bet. Flock is a name brand of an automated license plate reader. It reads the license plates of every vehicle that goes by. If that vehicle has a hit on it, say a cops alert, an alert that gets put in by a police department, it's cops, KOPS, keeping our police safe. If there's, if the car is stolen, if there's other hits, it is not this driver's revoked. It's not the petty misdemeanor stuff. These are the large crimes. It will then notify our officers that this wanted vehicle just went by the Flock camera. The officers on an app obtain a picture from Flock of the license plate. Officers get to that area, look for it. If they find the vehicle, they verify the plate, they run the plate in the squad computer to verify that in fact that vehicle description and the registration matches what they have there, and they can engage in enforcement from there.
And if it helps, I can give kind of a little bit more of the back end, how everything works. So, so the picture that's taken is sent to Flock Central Secure Database. And that, when we do searches for that can only be accessed by our officers unless we share, we share that network with other cities. So until recently, we were sharing with other cities, like Crystal, we would say, and they would have access to do searches for certain license plates that they were looking for, or something that came up on a hit list, or a hot list, sorry. But that recently has been revoked, so right now, the only people who have access to that data is when we do searches, are the 30 officers in the precinct, and actually, I think there's 32 total, so, including me and Linda. So in other words, all that data is secure on Flock's database, and we do searches for it to kind of, to pull up any information that we're looking for in that. That's the same information that's sent to officers, the apps that they get in.
Is that the same, so I thought the license plate readers exist on vehicles themselves as well too? Is that the same kind of premise, or is it something, I mean, I'm trying to think of different in that sense as well too, but the same process?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. They're all ALPRs. It just depends on which license plate readers. It just depends on which brand you're using. Yes, the ones that are on the vehicles are essentially the same type of technology.
But I would say that those ones do not share with other agencies. Other agencies can't look at that information.
And the follow-up question, kind of the question that you had asked as well too, was, how do you revoke access, or how is that access?
That's a good point. So there's 3 administrators of our Flock system. Captain Elder, me, and Linda, who works in the office. I remember her last name.
Geyser.
Basically, it's like any other program. We have the admin access. You can set up users, you can deactivate users, you can add users. It's very secure. It's just like any other thing. There's 2-factor authentication, anything that comes through for that. Yeah, that's how basically how users are added for access.
So, I'm just making sure I miss you. I'm trying to move that, I can see. Yes.
If you were to say, security wise, right, like we use online banking. Every one of us has probably deposited a check or moved money, taken money out of our bank account. We would consider that to be a secure environment. How does Flock compare to like the financial institutions?
That's an excellent question. My background is actually in network security. I worked on a lot of network security infrastructure in the background, a lot of Cisco devices. I don't know their actual back end, but I can tell you from a user perspective, it's just as secure as any banking institution. If somebody was to send a request to a system and didn't have any, even if they had a username and password, it would require a two-factor authentication, much like your bank usually does when we do that. But as far as their actual back-end technology, I'm not aware of that.
But would you say, so like in my line of business, I work, we have software relation, and we're certified, right? So we can work with government entities, we can work with, financial institutions who really, really care about the security of their information. Are there same level of certificates, security certification that the Flock system has, or these ALPR systems have, that would be of the highest level?
So I'm not sure if you mean like technology certificates or.
Yeah, just like, just network security and,
Yeah, so anytime I'm sure you've all seen this, when you go to a website, it'll say, this is the certificate you want. So it's all SSL technology, secure socket layer. They use the same technology as far as securing their systems as your banks or other financial institutions.
Okay, I had a question too about the automated license plate readers. So I know they're on police vehicles, but what are other examples of where they're at, like throughout the city? Because I know when I did the ride along, that was like my first interaction with one, but I'm just wondering, like throughout, like Robbinsdale, how many more are there?
Sure. We have 2 Flock cameras in the city. And there's no other types of automatic license plate readers other than just in the squad cars.
Yep, there's one on Oakdale, West Broadway, I believe. And then County Road 81 southbound at 41st Avenue. You can kind of see them there. They blend in real well, but if you're looking for them, you can see them.
mentioned that some settings were changed pretty recently in terms of other agencies' access. Can you talk about what led up to that and what was the reasoning?
It's a good question.
I'll start that one. When we saw the news article, I went to Chris, we did some research as to, what really happened, and it did show that Mille Lacs County, did access our system. According to Flock, there's nothing yielded from that search. I was not happy knowing that Mille Lacs was utilizing systems, from my assumption, not from their standpoint, but from a federal standpoint. So I restricted access from Mille Lacs. They have 0 access now. We also restricted any search access for criminal immigration and also civil immigration. So those cannot even be reviewed or seen by any agency.
Quick follow-up, the latter two settings that you just mentioned, was that also recent or was that prior?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and the way they access our system is a little, it sounds like, oh, they have access to our data. What they actually do is they can do a search, and if we're part of their network search, then our information shows up along with, and it's not all our information, it's if they get a hit back. So it's kind of like you can think of it as, they're searching a network that we opted into for a specific thing. Now that search didn't yield anything, but the fact that they were doing it for that purpose is kind of what decided that we're gonna move forward with this kind of change.
So, well, my question is a little bit on a different angle, so I'll save that one, but in this vein or this line of thought, just the idea that so I think that gets to that initial question of policy versus settings, which it does sound like it was more of a setting, and I guess one question I have is that it's it sounds like we can control it, is it all opt-in or opt-out? Can we say hey, we know how Crystal uses this data, we have, a joint agreement with them, and so their access and the way that they use it is fine, but this other municipality, we're not sharing our data with them, there's no reason they would ever need access to our data.
Correct. It's basically a checkbox list of what agencies we allow and don't allow.
Okay. But then you also mentioned the two different, sorry to interrupt you, but then there's you kind of dial down into immigration enforcement, which is now not allowed.
Correct.
So then it's different types of things, not only municipalities or police departments that can look, but also then what they're looking for.
Yeah, I know how many options are there.
Different categories, yeah, 7 or 8, something like that. And immigration is one that you can just universally check off.
Okay.
So for all your agencies.
You talked about kind of a nationwide pool, and stop me if I'm wrong, but there was more of a statewide pool that entities could search, and we were in that, and that has also now been, we are no longer in that pool.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, and so it's not that, you can think of it as local. So basically everyone that that could access our data sent us a request saying, so it might be Crystal, hey, we want your data. And we would get some agencies that are I don't know, Illinois or something. If they're not local, we would deny them.
Yeah.
It was basically Minnesota, a few South Dakota, Wisconsin, those kind of things. So all that's been turned off as far as what we share. Now we do still have access to access their networks, which is interesting, until they decide that they might not want that.
Okay.
Mr. Council, any more questions off top or? Yeah.
So I got some feedback, I think we all did, from a resident that was calling out some specific things that not necessarily contradicting, but challenge some of the statements that were made in the memo. And I guess one that kind of jumps out in line with the actual reading of the license plate, we kind of talked about what it's actually doing. There was the thought that it's a 24/7 camera that's just filming Robbinsdale and everything that goes on around there. It sounds to me like that's not the case. but I just wanna, I mean, it's on all the time, but it's only captured, it's not like, it wouldn't capture me in my car, it's just the license plate image that you have access to, is that right?
Correct.
So I guess just maybe talk to that a little bit and clarify that.
Yeah, I'd say it's not I mean, I couldn't just look at it right now and see the live feed of it. It is when a car drives by, it's activated by the clock system. I don't know that part of the technology, but then it automatically runs that plate, and if there's a hit, then it notifies us.
As opposed to like, you know, when you see like the MnDOT cameras, which is just
And
showing.
those are running live.
Yeah, like I can log in and look at that camera and see all the traffic that's going by, and I guess they have the capability to get license plate. But this is not like that. This is just a license plate.
Yeah,
Like
as far as I'm aware, our cameras don't even have that kind of video continuation coverage. It basically, it goes through, it takes a picture, AI focuses on the license plate, and that's what's stored. Nothing else is stored.
Okay. I mean, I think that's helpful to know, because if people think that it's like a MnDOT camera, that's very different than capturing like an individual image of only a license plate, and it can't capture video is what you're saying, it's only still images of just a license plate, so I think that's helpful to know.
And I just have kind of like one last question. As it pertains to like the MoveLock software, that's like the AI portion of it, I'm pretty sure it's like, you know, nationwide, you know, police vehicles like have this, but I kind of want to just put a number to how much that costs. Because obviously, you know, there's going to be more technology too that, you know, comes across and it's, you know, introduced to cities and stuff, but just curious, like, how much does it cost? Like, flock data, storing the data, I mean, and it's okay not to help figure it out, but.
Yeah, I believe it's $6,000 for both of them.
Those,
$6,000 for both black cameras.
So 3,000
$3,000,
apiece.
yeah.
Oh, okay. That's helpful. So excited.
It's a lot less than I thought it would be.
me too, honestly. Seeing what a lot of places charge for their service and for data retention.
And if I'm not mistaken, I think I was reading, some of the information we received, that how long is the data stored out there for access? I know that's also, we talk about data privacy and some of those things as well too, like how people feel maybe this is unjust or unviewed as far as accessibility for, you know, outside information, like how long does data stay in that, or like, say in the system?
In the flock central database?
Yeah.
2 years.
2 years.
2 years. When we do searches, we can do searches for 30-day increments going back 2 years. Or 24 months.
Yes, please.
So one other question just about the data and other places having access to data. So we've made some changes, so that's limited, which I think is a good thing. But let's say that they know that we don't allow, you know, like immigration information shared, but they do another search that allows them to see that like a license plate associated with a car that they're looking for came through. I mean, again, it's like, I'm not exactly sure like how that data would be used, but I guess if they somehow understood that like, is there any way for us to know, we will always know who's accessing our data, or is it just like if they went into the system and got access to it, there's no way for us to know?
Well, it wouldn't show a hit.
Okay.
If it's immigration.
Right.
So they wouldn't even get that, I mean, I guess I don't know how they could go around that in any way. I mean,
Any time that you're doing a search, you have to put down a case number, your department's case number, and we do audits on that.
Okay.
To ensure that,
Yeah,
you know, the people are being above board.
I think that's what I was getting at. So
Okay,
I think
good.
that's really helpful. Just the idea that like it is, they're, like if you did an audit and you saw, hey, we did research on this case and it's not associated with what you said it was, like that would create an issue, which you would then be able to follow up on.
yeah, we kind of have a 3 audit step. So first of all, Chris Banks, every 30 days, will kind of take a look at that data as he shifts it over. Then we have an obligated form for one of our admin sergeant. We'll look at a 30-day list, just randomly pick 3 different cars, and do the research as to why it was searched, is there a case number, reasoning for it, and then just some of the flock internal data that they have, I don't know what you call it, the hit number, and just to track all that kind of stuff. And then that is submitted to Captain Miller and myself. So, and then we do a biannual audit, which is required.
And that's by an outside vendor that comes in and does the actual audit.
Yeah, that's helpful.
And so just one more question, I think Chief Foley, you mentioned this earlier with the case of Malox and them accessing our data, so you're saying that back when they did that, and they scanned, Crystal, Robbinsdale, whatever it was, there was no hit, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And let's say that they try to do that again, and not just Malox, but just anyone that's trying to access our data, it'd be like the same outcome.
Right. And then they just wouldn't even see anything.
Yep, it would show up as a search, but we would start sharing it.
Thank you. So something that the council worked on earlier this year was an ordinance related to immigration enforcement. And so with this in mind, what controls are in place, that ensures that Robbinsdale data can't be used, for voluntarily accessed, I should say, or provided for civil immigration enforcement? And then if you could speak to what happens if an agency attempts to do so, whether or not they can, but what happens if there's an attempt to do this?
Kind of to remind you that just, how would that look?
Well, they would have no access to it. So, I mean, they can do a search. So when you do searches, you search on Flock's database for everybody that's opted into your search network. So they would do a search, and if we're not sharing with them, which we're not sharing with anybody right now, they can't search our stuff. So basically, ours is kind of siloed in the way it is right now, where any searches that are done out there right now, our Robbinsdale's data is not included in their search. As far as an agency, like a federal agency, we don't share anything of that. I can't think of any other way.
So then as a follow-up question, when you say no other agency can search, is that any different from other agencies accessing the data rather than just searching the data?
Nope, it is the exact same. When I can use search and access interchangeably.
So,
I know we have a pretty strong partnership with Crystal. I mean, their officers cover us, we cover them, same with Golden Valley. New Hope. Does it limit the effectiveness of Flock if we're not sharing with those agencies? I mean, and Mille Lacs is in a category of their own right now, right? But
I would say yes. Our crime in the metro is ambulatory. They're not just going to Crystal and doing crime. They're hitting the surrounding areas. And that data sharing with agencies that we know how they operate and what the rules are, and we know they'll abide by that. That's what really helps make the system better.
and we will most likely eventually start sharing data little by little. What I'm looking for is putting together a form, just kind of a consent that if you do access this, and I'll identify certain things that you cannot use our data for any of this stuff, even immigration, even though they can't even see it anymore. And just so we have this agreement with the city, so if they do access, we have that document saying that they signed it.
all right, well, that's comforting to know that, one, we're looking at, I understand why we pulled back to better understand what has looking at, okay, we have partners we work with, right, closely. You know, so there's a trust there, but then to kind of formalize that trust, I think is super important, so I'm glad to hear you guys are doing that.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that because, again, public safety, Robbinsdale is super small and we have all these surrounding, cities, suburbs and I'm wondering if for like a policy action, if there's a way to get some sort of coalition, I don't even know if coalition's like the right word for it, but just get together with leadership, like whether it's like Crystal, us, surrounding folks to kind of make sure we're in agreement on who we're gonna share that data with, because we also want to look at public safety outcomes as well. If there are benefits to block, it's, crime prevention measure, but I also want to make sure that, we have the trust with the surrounding folks and kind of, we'll just look to you guys on how we could do that. I mean, something we can do as a council, mayor obviously, but what would that kind of look like for you guys?
The relationship between the administrations and certainly the chiefs amongst the cities you mentioned is very strong. And as we move forward into policies and practices and protocols, we're in conversations with them with grand regularity. And as Chief Foley moves forward with this, spearheading it, there will be certainly an agreement with those cities. And we take input from them. We'll ask them advice, they'll ask us advice. None of us are, and especially cities that are our size, and I believe it was Mayor Sutton that mentioned, we don't have a large crime that happens in any one of our cities that every other city isn't there supporting and helping. So I have zero doubt in my mind that as we move forward and we build this consortium, that everyone will be completely on the same page. And as a matter of fact, I'm sure the cities will all have the same standards and expectations. That wouldn't be our first rodeo with something like that. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it did.
Thank you.
And yeah, we can get some follow-up on what that would look like, because I would want to even some input for leadership, but yeah, we can get to that.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think that sort of leads into there's policy that, I mean, I know that the city council it's like, I think we're involved in it some level, or maybe not. I guess my question is like, there's work that's gonna be done by police and staff, and I appreciate that, and I think that's a good thing in the way that we're engaging our other neighboring cities. But I think it's also, is that like in tandem with council conversation? Is that something that council is responsible for to give them direction on? Or I guess I'm looking to you for something to put on that.
Mayor Pro Tem, thank you. I guess what I would intend to do is, where Mayor Pro Tem introduced the item, first in a series of conversations. What we're having now, the chief is taking your input, I'm taking your input. Certainly these conversations are already happening. It's mentioning time when certain access off, taking this very seriously. Going forward, we would intend to work with the chief, as Kevin Eller knows, we'll continue to work with our neighbors, that my peers, the chief's peers, something again we all take very seriously and want to get it right. As a policy develops, something we bring back to all of you.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that question. I was gonna leave it to us around there. I do also recognize we have audience members. There was an audience who also came here to maybe speak and provide some input as well too. So I want to make sure that we create that space and time for that as well. So.
Thank you. Yeah, I just had 3 questions, and thanks for explaining everything. That's been really helpful. Okay, so the first question is, what besides stolen vehicles give hits on flock? And then who's the outside vendor who does the audit in Robbinsdale? And then you mentioned there's 7 or 8 categories that you can toggle off for access, and one is immigration enforcement, and then what are the other ones?
Well, first of all, the vendor we use is Minnesota Security Consortium. information out of several different police agencies, and, it's also part of what's called a LASSO, is kind of the overall IT security for several cities as well.
As far as what gets hit, are the hit list? Or not list?
How many different entities are there that are along with the immigration?
Well, there's only two that have universal toggling, and that is, immigration and minor, something to do with minor, anything that's to do with, that's to do with minor access, or if there's a minor involved.
And child services?
I don't know if
I
child
don't believe
services
so,
would be
no,
involved in that.
no.
No, it's just, that's the two that I know we can universally turn on.
Okay. And then just one more thing is, besides, stolen vehicles, what else gives?
Cops alerts,
Okay.
Missing adults, missing children, people with felony warrants, gross misdemeanor warrants. Anyone wanted for, assaults, domestic assaults.
violent crime, that stuff.
Yeah.
Can I just to clarify that, that is a person associated with a license plate.
It has to be
Like, it has
registered.
no idea who the
Yes,
person
right,
is.
exactly.
It's
Right.
just
Right.
that vehicle is associated with someone who has,
The registered owner is associated as having a warrant out for their arrest.
And, our officers keep that in mind if they do locate that vehicle and do make a stop.
okay.
I have a question. Is there, so if the cameras take a photo of every license plate, does it store that data of every license plate? So can you like retroactively be like, well, now this vehicle is stolen, but I can like look back, like I can search a specific license plate. And so if I drive my car and I'm, there's no reason for it to be, hit and I drive by, but then later I like commit a violent crime, can you like search up my license plate and say like, well, 2 weeks ago Anya was fine, but now she's a violent criminal, so we know that she passed through.
We would be able to do that in the course of a criminal investigation. Case in point, we had somebody report a car stolen, but they'd been out of town and it was stolen sometime in the last 2 weeks. We were able to access the system and found that it had been hitting, different cameras, and we were able to at least get it drilled down to a time that we realized the vehicle was probably stolen and the areas that it was, likely in.
Yeah, that is good.
So yes, the picture is stored,
Okay.
that can be searched up to, like I said, I think it's held for 2 years.
Hi, well, first of all, thank you so much for coming here and for sharing all the information. It's been very insightful, so appreciate the transparency around all of that. I do have a couple of questions and then something I wanted to say at the end, but my questions have to do with the abilities of the camera, because I understand that, some of these abilities were toggled off, for example, the ability to search for immigration, but I know that some clock cameras do have the capability of identifying individuals. I don't know if these specifically have like facial recognition ability that has been toggled off or just doesn't exist on the camera to begin with as an option. So that's one question I have.
May I answer that?
Oh, sure, yes.
It only takes a picture of the license plate. You don't get a picture of the person. There's no facial recognition, capabilities.
Yep, and that is not a toggle, that is a hardware, like we don't have, there's nothing that could do that on our systems.
Thank you, I appreciate that. The next question I had has to do with the actual flock database that stores the data, because, per policy, it cannot be held for more than 60 days, oftentimes less than, or it'll be gone by 30 days, just because of the way it's constructed. But because the flock database can hold the data for 2 years, is there any awareness around if that data is being accessed by third parties after RPD is done with it? Is there any way that that can go into other hands that could be unbeknown for the RPD. And then, I guess, my other thing that I wanted to mention was, I guess have other types of ALPRs been considered instead of flock? Because, I mean, there are other types of traffic cameras that are like red light based, for example, or are motion based. But with flock cameras, because they have that AI capability, there's some concern around it that's been less spoken about with it, like, I know transparency has been a big issue, or like fear of surveillance, but the AI piece is a little bit concerning as well, because with machine learning and that type of technology, there isn't a lot of regulation on it. So even though at a city level, there may be policy for it, at a state and even a federal level, it's just the technology is evolving so fast that it's difficult to keep up with it. And it's also, there's concerns around the company and how it may use that. So just a statement I wanted to make in terms of some of the concerns that are less discussed, but still very valid. So again, I just wanted to say thank you again for answering my questions and comments today.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I wanna make sure that, your second question is addressed and we don't bypass.
I did get a little ahead of myself, so.
I bypassed it myself, my apologies. I'm just repeating.
Can
Received.
you see about, let me see how we're gonna take it. I'm trying to see. Yeah. So the question was around the regulation of AI technology and recognizing that it's continuing to advance and evolve, and how can we ensure that this 2-year period that Flock is utilizing our information that you're no longer using for other reasons.
Yeah, that was good.
Thank you.
That's something we don't have an answer for, we'd have to research that. I have not seen anything that shows how and if it's being used. You kind of asked another question about other brands, and there are other brands of flock cameras, that have, that pretty much do the same thing, in other cities.
The flock system is motion activated. So, as we stated earlier, it's not just a constant running feed, it's motion activated, that's when it knows stuff.
Yes, my apologies, I
No,
didn't catch that.
no apology necessary.
And as far as we're informed, Flock purges the data after that 24 months, like deletes it. I mean, they're a company, we assume they tell us isn't true.
And as far as some more transparency, one thing we're working on, and I'll defer to Chris because he is the expert behind the scenes, is that Flock has come out with a transparency page that some agencies have already put out, such as Stillwater. We'll soon see Crystal putting out a transparency page here within, I'd say, by a few weeks. We'll get that out, and you want to explain kind of what the transparency page shows?
Sure, a lot of it is in questions that we get. So where are our cameras? How many are there? How many hits are going by? Who do we share with? Any type of policies that we have, and it's a little tool within that they've added that we can decide what the public, and we just put on our webpage up there so that we can refer people and say, here's what the Flock cameras are, here's what they do, here's the statistics, and we go from there.
And that would be every 30 days, or would that be a total tally?
I think it's actually a running total as it goes, because it's integrated with Flock, so I think it's just, it updates every day.
And then we have a question in the back too.
So there was an article a few months ago about a Flock employee that was reviewing the video footage from a Flock camera from inside a children's gymnastics studio. And the fact that they were able to do that would suggest that the cameras are not just still images. The fact that they put one indoors would suggest that they're not just license plate readers, that they have the ability to do something more. And so the fact that that occurred at all, the fact that that was possible, causes me some concern. Additionally, I have looked at some of the contracts that some other cities have with Flock, and the contracts are not consistent. Some of the cities' contracts indicate that the data is owned by the city. Others don't stipulate that, which would suggest that Flock can do whatever they like with the data. And even in those cases where cities do have contracts that say they own the data, in some cases Flock has inserted a clause that says that they have licensure to use the data anyway. So I feel like the issue is perhaps a little bit more complicated than we might like it to be.
Yes, I will say that there are different types of cameras. So our flocks, the hardware we're using doesn't do the video. They do have video capability on some of their cameras. We don't happen to employ those. As far as who owns the data and the contracts, we'd have to look at our actual contract and see what the verbiage is. It's a good question.
Kind of along that, a question and a comment, and a question kind of along the same lines of, if, I'm not familiar with like the terminology between like subpoena and warrant, but like if, some agency comes in and is asking for information that you are legally obligated to provide, is it something, and if they're interested specifically in flock data, would they come to you, the police department, in Robbinsdale, or would they go to flock in order to get same information but different ways? And I think it kind of goes back to the question of like, do we own our own data? Does flock license their data? Are there ways to get around you guys saying, no, you can't do this, but instead going to flock? I don't suppose you guys know off the top of your heads on that front.
For us specifically, they'd have to do a data request. And within the guidelines of the data request, we would provide the information that we are able to provide. As far as the second part, yeah, I have no idea.
Which was the second?
So we'll just kind of,
Like, the data request, as I understand it, is not like necessarily like, I am legally, the police department of Robbinsdale is legally obligated to provide it. That's on a more voluntary basis, I'm guessing. But like, if there is some like federal or state agency that's coming in and you are legally required to give them information, how, like, do they go through you? Would they just go through flock and we would have no way of knowing, like?
Flock would, I've seen in other cases, Flock will refer them to us, and if this is signed by a judge, we will provide the information.
Absolutely. Okay. So flock makes sure that they go directly to you as opposed to providing it themselves.
We have not had that here in
Okay.
Robbinsdale, but I will tell you that other agencies, and other commanders that I've spoken with have had cases referred back to them by Flock, for the release of information. Because Flock doesn't know if this is an active investigation, they don't
Yeah.
know what we need to redact, and so, that's, I'm sure the reason.
And the comment that I wanted to make was, it is concerning to me that the way that flock systems are set up, that Mille Lacs could like make a request and that the entities that it's making requests of would be unaware that it's making requests. So when you had mentioned just like, yeah, when after the Star Tribune article came out and we looked at it and we found that Mille Lacs made a search, got no hits. That has some concern to me that like it would be something that would not be immediately obvious in system architecture, whatever. I know this is more of like a flock thing, but my concern kind of lies around the fact that this is like complicated. There's a lot of like metadata stuff. There's a lot of searches upon searches, and like the kind of leaning back towards like the data privacy thing and the regulation around it. It's a little concerning to me how quickly information can be gathered and like how little guidance there is on how to handle that data. And so like police departments are kind of forced to make their own data security protocols and data privacy handling that might be inconsistent from city to city, statewide, nationwide. So that's kind of my concern on how we're using this and how quickly it can get out of hand. It's nice to know that we do have like, it sounds like a policy that has been like thought through, but I think that there are still things that concern me about. There are things that I think we can be doing better, and I don't know if we haven't really talked about the efficacy of like flock cameras and like these investigations, and I'm not sure if it's worth it just based off of like I've not heard many like publicized things on how successful it's been for us.
Well, I'll say one thing is that, I do understand those concerns, and that's exactly why we stopped sharing. So
Yeah.
we can take a pause and slowly take a look at this and figure out a little bit more from Flock and a little bit about the capabilities, so, as far as stories go, if you wanna share.
Yeah, there's two that come to my mind. One, which is more on a state level. They had the 7-year-old girl kidnapped up in Zimmerman, and they were able to, the vehicle hit on a flock camera south on 35. They were able to, get that car and get that child back. The suspect admitted he was bringing her down to sell her into sex trafficking. That's just one of the ones. We just had, one the night of, Whiz Bang Days, the night of the, fireworks. And there was a car stolen out of a neighboring city by a patient with dementia. And, it notified off of our flock. We were able to get that person pulled over and get them to safety and get them the help they needed, before they drove into Minneapolis. And he was going to the address he lived at 30 years ago, and it's not a great area. And, you know, we were able to get the car back to the rightful owner, as well as to get that person the help they needed. We had another case a few Saturdays ago where we had a hit on a stolen car. Our officers located it, attempted to stop it. They fled. We pursued, going down 394. They threw 2 guns out of the car. They got into Minnetonka. Minnetonka used stop sticks and deflated the tires. Other officers were able to go back and retrieve the guns that were thrown, and through the NIBIN system, they were able to show that those guns were used that morning in a shooting in Minneapolis. So we haven't screamed from the rooftops the efficacy of the system, but I will tell you, very heartfelt that if that was my 7-year-old granddaughter, I'd be really glad they found her.
Of course.
I'm glad that we're
I don't understand.
I'm glad, neither do I. I'm glad we're taking the pause to make sure we're doing this right. But I will tell you that having been on the street for over 30 years, I'm grateful to have a system like this that will help.
And I really do share your concerns. I'm just a normal citizen like you, and I happen to work in the police station. And privacy is very important to me. There was a point to this, I don't know what it was though. Sorry. Oh, that's what it was. Much like we don't really hear the daily interactions with the police have that are good, we don't hear about the good stuff on the news either. We only hear when things go bad. And that's just the nature of what the world we live in. So I think there are a lot of good outcomes from law.
Is there like it would be wonderful to see kind of along the line of like transparency, like stuff is like seeing cases that would have been unsolvable or significantly delayed without it. Because I think that would build the confidence that I think everyone's looking for right now.
I appreciate that comment. I do a lot of the communications for the police department, so I appreciate hearing that. Thank you. She does big communication. She's really the guru. I take care of the small stuff up at the PD.
Yeah, thank you everyone for being here, and this has been really informative, and I appreciate everyone like sharing their experiences. I similarly have been thinking about like who owns the data that Flock collects, and I feel like we are like in a small city and we trust each other, and I want our police officers to have a good experience. I want them to be able to catch criminals, but I also don't know if I necessarily trust Flock as a company. And so I like battle with that of like having something that's helpful, but also not necessarily knowing the line of which a company like Flock is willing to like move with the data that they have. So I don't know if that's necessarily a question, but I guess my question was like, who owns the data? But I think you wrote that down earlier. My other comment, I guess, is I've been thinking a lot about just surveillance in general, and I think I kind of keep going back to this example of like, we could all be super safe if we all got injected with, you know, something that tracked our every movement and could tell if we committed crimes, and like, that sounds insane, and like, obviously I don't think that that is this, but I just bring that up to acknowledge that there's a line in surveillance that like us as a society are unwilling to cross, because we're obviously not willing to like inject ourselves with something and have everything we do monitored. So I'm just thinking about like where that line is and how will we know when we cross it as a society.
I was just listening to a very good conversation, and that's what I really appreciate all the answers and the questions and really thoughtful commentary as well on this. And so this is the one of many, I think, conversations we can have around this, and knowing that you're, I know our goal was to give you some feedback or feedback, but it seems like there are some things that are taking place right now in real time. When council, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think some of the actions or things you're going to look further in and understand why the system itself more so, I think it's commendable. And I think recognizing the interagency piece and how we work with our fellow partners going to the important. So I'm wondering, from the council, if our direction is really around, we'd love to hear about what you uncover as well too, as you're continuing to dive deeper into some of this work, and this supports your efforts with prosecuting line and as well as that. Like, I think we do have the police manual policy around your automatic license plate readers, and that's something we should revisit, or is that not right now, but that is a current need? And I think that's just a reality. I know that there's some work they're gonna do, so it's something you might focus on. So to council and then right to see.
Thank you. And I'll echo the thanks for answering a lot of our questions. This has been very informative. From, next steps, I think when we are presented with information, it brings up more questions, and we kind of craving more information from that. So I'd be curious if, as Mayor Pro Tem said, to keep us informed with the next steps and what you have in mind for improvements to either policy-wise or operationally. I would like to stay informed with that. And then in terms of the contract with Flock, I don't know if it's possible, but I would like to see if the contract would be shared with council. If that could be possible.
Would you look into that? So we can get you a version, certainly.
I think that would be helpful. And then, when I think back in our previous meeting, we talked a little bit about what the council goals and priorities that we've set this year. And a very important one is building relationships between your agency and the community, and building trust with that. And I think so much of what has been shared tonight is helpful in realizing that goal. So what I would ask is that there is some form of proactive
Flock does have community engagement teams where, they go to city councils and work sessions. And if there's any point you want me to invite a member from Flock to come and answer some of the awesome questions that came from people here, I think that'd be important, but I'll leave it up to your discretion.
Set it up in case. Of course, but don't think.
I just think it would be important to answer some of those questions that, you know, we don't really necessarily have yet to, you know, have a representative, not just answer that to us, but also just to the community.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, just to be blunt about it, I think there's a lot of distrust in just not our community specifically, but just across the board. So I mean, I feel like it's like we're saying information that's been shared or is like publicly available from Flock, and people are like, I don't believe that. And they have had issues where there's been, you know, they said one thing and what they did was something different. And so it's like, I would appreciate hearing an answer directly from the source, but I don't know that it like is it's not like a cure-all, it's like another step, and I think it's helpful, but I do think that they'll also hear the feedback of that level of distrust that's out there, that, you know, whether it's warranted or not, it's the perception. And so I think that, you know, I guess as we like invite people to come to our community, it's like I don't want them to just get like raped on it, but at the same time they need to hear that feedback. I think it's good to have them here.
I think we do a pretty good job of.
Yeah.
But I do thanks for what you said, I appreciate that. Tim, we'll turn to you, sorry, Council, anything else that you all want to add or put in there?
Well, I mean, you kind of asked, and I think from my perspective, it's like, it's really helpful to know more details, to understand what we're doing, and I think that those actions are appropriate. Knowing that we're working towards a more holistic policy and how we're going to utilize this data, how we interact with our neighboring cities and police departments. I feel like, to Councilmember Parisian's point of like being informed on what's going on is really helpful. But I kind of feel like I want those steps to happen to what Tim was kind of mentioning of like, they'll come to us with some ideas, and I think then we can continue the conversation around what the policy is gonna look like moving forward. Which, I'm not saying that like, that's right, I'm just saying, I think that, I feel confident with where we're at now, knowing that we're moving towards something bigger that we'll be involved in.
Yeah.
And I'll just finish off with, you know, saying that it's part of our approach as well as the council to promote legislative safety for federal license enforcement, and you guys addressed that, and thank you for that. Talk about our goal session, and that was one of the big ones, so thank you again for answering the question.
All right, Tim, kick it right over to you. That sounds good. What's the clarifications you need from us?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I think we're in a good spot. We've got some policy to work on internally. Chief, and with whom he delegates, and I will work with some of our neighboring communities while we're doing some things internally. We've got some tech things to iron out, some good questions here tonight to get some answers to. I know on my communications check-in at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, the first thing on the agenda will be talking about what kind of page we're gonna beef up. I'm envisioning some kind of a FAQ, much like we did earlier in the year. Unfortunately, we have good practice in that, so we'll be able to put some materials together and start working on that also. So we've got some marching orders here. I won't give a hard timeline, but at some point we'll bring some policy back to y'all. We'll look at scheduling to get some folks out that can talk to some of the external tech things that we can't respond to. But again, to continue these transparent conversations. So that's what I'm getting here for.
All right, and thank you all for joining and staying as well.
Yeah.
We appreciate it.